My name is Elena Gold, and I'm going to talk about some work that I've been doing for my thesis here actually at Parsons in the MFA Design and Technology program. The work is still largely in progress, so I'd love to hear feedback from folks if you have any at the end of my talk. So, people often think of technology as something that's rigidly scientific, mathematical, totally objective, but everything has to be designed, and some person has to make all of those decisions, which means that our tech is always shaped by our values as well as our cultural and economic context. A Time article entitled "It's Not You, It's It" details the rising phenomena of voice-activated cars having difficulties understanding voice ranges most commonly heard in women. While this might be annoying or frustrating, imagine a world where the only way to call 911 would be through voice activation, or if that's a last resort, for example. An incident like that could be life-threatening. In America, a capitalist economy incentivizes people and companies to be profit-driven above all else. In this same example, our car company, incentivized to move quickly to push out the latest operating system, may have only tested on engineers working on it who may have only been male. While we grow as a capitalist nation, our technology grows more deeply intertwined with these values, even at the expense of those who reap nothing from the system, or worse, are stuck within a system that actively oppresses them. The rise of some of the technology we were all once in awe of, stuff like AI, IoT, or even instant social connection, has, for many, turned to distrust as we watch these technologies overtake our humanity. The following examples that I'll show you in just a sec illustrate just a few of the ways that some of these values have manifested in our mainstream technology. So the first one is the increased mining of personal data on social media sites. Google, for example, stores data for everywhere you've been, everything you've ever searched, all the apps you use, the videos you've watched, your Google Drive files, and the ones you've deleted, and of course has an advertisement profile on who they think you are. This is, of course, just the tip of the iceberg. So many other platforms have just as much data on you. But altogether, you've been pegged as a certain kind of person, and likely much of that information profile will remain intact even as you change and grow as humans do. Google conveniently doesn't recognize and account for that change. So another is engagement as a metric. Advertisers have been using engagement or human attention as a metric to measure success. The longer eyeballs stay glued to a screen, the more attention users give to the advertisement's posts tucked neatly just in between two identical posts from your grandma. I'm sure most of us are aware of the feeling of scrolling endlessly, hypnotically through Twitter, through Facebook, Instagram. Natasha Doubtful, author of Addiction by Design, refers to this state as the machine zone, a zone that's unsatisfying enough to keep you wanting more, almost like a bag of chips. In my experience, I'll find myself endlessly eating up content until an ad or a video lags, and then finally I feel like I can pull myself away from it, realizing just how much time I've spent in the endless loop. And lastly, quantifying relationships through likes or follows. My final example is the like or the follow button that most social media platforms encourage us to use to interact with one another. The like and follow, like much of graphical user interface design, is binary. One can like and unlike, follow or unfollow, turning cooing at a baby photo, or asking about someone's family, or even basking in the glow of a 2-hour chat with a new friend into a Boolean true or false. A close group of 12 followers, intimately interacting with one another, somehow still feels shameful next to a 25,000 follower influencer posting yet again, thanking their fans for their support. So what does it mean when the majority of our intimate interactions happen behind a screen, or behind an animated heart, or a fluctuating number? So I've just presented three very real examples of technology transforming the way we're seen online, how we're manipulated, and how our human relationships have transformed. For my thesis, I've decided to focus on interface as a site of oppression. I chose interface for a variety of reasons. For one, it's our first line of interaction with our computers. Much of our interface is actually meant to shield us from the inner workings of our computer. It provides a friendly graphical component that distills the ones and zeros down into an icon of a file folder, for example. Interface is how we experience code. Moreover, the metaphors for our interface often align neatly with the elements found in the office of white-collar employees. Think the desktop, or the computer file, or the folder. These are all very literally, through these icons, the computer is literally represented as a tool that at the end of the day is still meant for production. Another way to look at the computer, and more specifically the internet, might be as a space for performance. The panopticon-like nature of the internet has only increased that perception. Extending this metaphor of the internet as a stage, the user interface we're given within the browser, for example, are props, let's say, in which we're given to act with. Though these props don't define who we are on the internet, they can help us more easily morph into the people that a certain platform might expect us to be. Let's take the three examples I referenced earlier. So first, the Google search bar, of course a classic one, grants us sort of with an illusion of freedom, right? It's like this blank open bar that leads to these endless possibilities. It almost sort of feels like a magic 8-ball in that sense. The design of that interface makes it seem like Google provides a service that gives answers to questions, when that's far from the case. Google is first and foremost a company that serves its advertisers through its platform. Its algorithm just delivers its search results tightly tailored to fit its profile of the searcher, or worse, tailored to what it thinks the searcher might click on. Safia Noble's research on algorithms of oppression, I think, illustrates this really nicely. And it points to an example in which Google presented users who searched for black girls almost exclusively on the first page with links pointing to pornography, a product of what was likely highly profitable for Google. This illusion of freedom and openness ultimately serves Google, allowing us to feel like we can give it our most intimate questions, and then it'll parse that data into what many of us know is advertising gold. So in our second example, I touched on one of the key design principles that ensures we're engaged, and that's infinite scrolling. And you can probably identify this kind of interface design everywhere, or at least certainly on all social media platforms. This sort of seemingly limitless content preys, what I would say, on our worst selves. The prop in this case casts us as the consumer and preys on our inability to know exactly what we're getting ourselves into. Each time we scroll, we're delivered with a small surprise. Sometimes we're given content that's boring, but sometimes we're rewarded handsomely with something especially exciting. Falling into this rhythm, it becomes incredibly hard to set a limit when we don't know what we might get next. There are, of course, other design features that play into this hypnotic state, but infinite scrolling has been wildly successful in that regard. So lastly, we have the like and follow buttons. And for these crucial elements of interface, I wanted to talk about the way that they've ultimately served to mechanize our relationship with one another. I'm sure those of us on Instagram are familiar with the kind of classic, like, swipe, double tap to like, swipe, double tap. And it almost has become an etiquette surrounding Instagram that seems to come from the upkeep of relationships that we form with people in our circle. The performance, for many, becomes more important than the act of meaningfully engaging. So, we can also point to many other examples of the way interface design subtly manipulates us. I spoke a little bit about binary before and how it serves as the foundation for much of our computers. And that often translates to interface. So what does it mean if you're a computer-using person who identifies outside of the binary? At the surface level, there are design elements everywhere that insist that we identify ourselves via a drop-down menu or radio buttons asking us to categorize ourselves neatly. This might be frustrating for some, But for someone who is non-binary, this might actually serve as just another instance in which their identity comes into question. For someone already attacked by the outside world for their existence, this can cause real harm. Or take Hinge, the dating app that some of you might be familiar with. In 2014, they didn't even have the option for users to select that they were interested in the two binary genders they did offer, men and women. Not only was this annoying to have to switch back and forth if you did want to see more than one option, it almost felt as if being bisexual wasn't an option, for Hinge at least. A system built on binaries doesn't take into account that humans don't experience the world as a binary one, and forcing us to might be dehumanizing in some ways. But even so, I'm not here to take a stance on binary, per se, but rather to talk about the way that binary thinking has translated over to our technology and what this might mean. That kind of thinking can be harmful. So I'm pointing to these examples as instances of oppression because of the way the interface surreptitiously manipulates our behavior, overlooks our intentions, identities, emotions, all in the name of turning a profit. Like every discussion that touches on oppression, I'd like to acknowledge that this is obviously an intersectional one. The tech industry has largely been built up by straight white men, and their values are often the ones that are deeply encoded into the very fabric of our computers. As a queer person, I feel most comfortable speaking to my own experiences and how our interface design pushes a hetero and gender normative narrative onto us. And I've chosen to look at interface through the lens of queer theory, both because it's something I'm passionate about, but also because queer theory, in a sense, acknowledges this myth of the binary. And to stretch that metaphor, sort of a more non-normative existence in this very binary world. Okay, so I've just talked to you guys about like a ton of depressing stuff. I'm sorry. I hope the second half of my presentation brings a little bit of levity to this. So brace yourselves. I wanted some of that. Cool. So, querying the interface. I chose to examine the instances of oppression baked into our interfaces through queer theory for a number of reasons. But before I start, I wanted to define how I'll be using the word queer. So the definition that I like to use is one that I paraphrased from Naomi Clark and Merritt Kopas's talk in 2014 at the Queer Games Convention. And that's a queer to mean an embodied resistance to the naturalized narratives and categories. So, thinking about the interface as a site of oppression, I pulled from thinkers, writers, makers, and activists like Zach Glass, Jack Halberstam, Adrian Shaw, Naomi Clark, and Merritt Kopas, and so many others. And specifically, I'd like to talk about Zach Glass's queer technology and how that served as a starting point for my own work. Zach Glass writes about queer technology as a necessity to counter a society increasingly defined by technology. He asks, or is there a subcultural technology that offers empowering, subversive structures and processes to all bodies, producing a freedom that exists as fact, a freedom that is foreign to no one? How might creating queer technology, specifically that subverts or resists these power paradigms, carve out a space for all kinds of oppressed people to find safety and freedom in their existence? More specifically, how might we strip these systems of power they hold? Queer theory, to me, and approaching queerness as an embodied resistance to these sites of oppression, has provided a way for me to embody, in a digital sense, this kind of subversion. So Jack Halberstam's Queer Art of Failure also serves as a jumping off point for creating this kind of work. When success and progress are the pinnacle of human achievement, failure is often seen as the opposite. Historically, queerness has been viewed as existing outside of the traditional narrative of growing up, finding love, having children, and providing for your family so that they one day can do it all over again. Again, historically, queer people have been excluded from this narrative in a number of ways, and that is often casting them as failed in this respect. But failure is not acknowledged for its potential. Failure is the permission failure is the permission to not quite know, to experiment, to seek knowledge. Queerness can therefore be seen as breaking free from this success narrative, giving oneself permission to shift, to change, to grow. Success in a technological sense often lies in the usefulness of a piece of technology. The more useful, often defined as automated, efficient, or fast, the more power technology holds. The following is a quote from Blast's Queer Technology that I also find particularly relevant. Quote, "I think queer technologies want to work in the interstices of useful and useless, or to find new uses through the useless. Importantly, this is not about deconstruction, it's about use, about doing something, experimenting with new ways of doing and making things happen," end quote. How might I, too, attempt to address my concept by finding new uses through the useless? How might our relationship with technology change if we were its caretakers, or perhaps if it was the user and we were the interface? These questions and others drove me to create my own version of a queer interface in the hope that I, too, could begin to redefine what's useful. The act of redefining such an important word in our technological lexicon must exist through a decidedly impractical methodology, one that uses experimentation, play, and investigation. I believe pursuing a solutionist approach to this problem would be antithetical to my concept. By using my skills and time to focus on creating technology that might crudely be defined as useless, I'm inherently thwarting the cultural incentives typically associated with working in technology. The work that I'm making and hope to continue to make will not be for efficiency, productivity, or speed, but for openness, understanding, emotion, experimentation, silliness, and beyond. So, in order to embark on my journey and to understand queer interface, I wrote a script to randomly pair one example from two categories, one of technology and one expressions of queerness. My reason for randomization here was just to start making work that I wouldn't intentionally pair together if I was given the choice. Though randomizing in code is never truly random, it served the purpose that it needed to here. I decided to allow my list of technologies to range from I decided to allow my list of technologies to range from interface design elements, such as radio buttons, to larger, more concrete technologies, such as programming languages. Though I am interested in interface elements, I wanted to leave room to explore new realms of technology and technological designs that may yield interesting results. Expressions of queerness, on the other hand, were words that veered away from the capitalist markers we usually associate with technology, and instead included traits that are amorphous, unfixed, or decidedly human. The only rule for myself was that I had to create something that addressed whatever prompt I was given, no matter what the prompt was. Cool. So, I'd like to walk you through 8 of my prototypes and discuss some of the takeaways. Though I came to some conclusions through these experiments, there are also a lot of questions that are born out of their existence. This project, after all, is not a solutionist one, so bear with me, as there's just like a ton of questions that I'll ask. So the first one is, how might close buttons express connection? This prompt led me to think more deeply about the act of closing. The act of closing or ending on a human scale can carry a lot of weight. On a digital scale, too, it once meant a lot more than it used to. Design standards now prioritize indestructible design, or design that makes sure that an accidental closing, deleting, or erasing can be undone. Close a tab, Control-Shift-T will bring it right back up again. And for a lot of us, that's been life-saving. But are there implications for how this feature might translate over to real life? How might our cavalier quit, don't save, be reflected in the way we carelessly treat someone we love, for example? I have no proof of this, of course, but I wanted to try and think about what it might look like what it might look like for a close button to carry this kind of weight. Here, I've created a close button that instead ritualizes the act of closing. At the end of a tab or browser's window's life, it delivers a message to the person interacting with it. This message contains their last memory, a brief thank you for their birth, and for its death, and its number or its name. Would we start to feel indebted to our browsers in some way? Would the ritual surrounding opening and closing a new window change? Prototype number 2 is how might icons express a bedtime ritual. Care in human sense doesn't quite translate over digitally. The way we as humans love and care is harder to do in a setting that doesn't provide us with the tools to do so. We can't take our icons on a virtual walk, for example, or be sure that they hear us when we greet them good morning. What if, at the end of an evening, we quite literally put our computers to sleep? In this video, I set my desktop background to depict a room with the sun setting. And as my time on the computer came to an end, I took my icons, distributed amongst the virtual shelves, floor cushions, etc., and put them in their virtual bed, one by one. When all icons had been put to bed, I then turned the brightness all the way down, and I closed my laptop. It felt important to me to take something as intimate, something as parental, as tucking someone into bed and apply that to the machine I spend so much time with throughout the day. How might our relationship to our computer change if we were in charge of gently waking it up every morning or putting it to sleep? Third prototype, how might push notifications express promiscuity? What if our push notifications, while still representing information about the influx of notifications on our phones, also moved around freely to have relationships with one another? I used an iPhone screen just because of how often we see the apps on our phones covered with little red dots begging us to check them. And in part, I wondered if the nagging feeling of needing to relieve our notifications might disappear if they weren't so dependent on us. Perhaps the little numbers that populate their body represent their happiness, or the number of partners they have, or maybe something altogether unquantifiable. Ultimately, I wanted to reimagine something that solely relies on us as an entity that has its own sexual and romantic desires and is able to act freely on them. So the fourth is, how might switches, levers, buttons, etc. express purposelessness? The GIF here depicts a classic Windows 95 interface. I used it just because it kind of represents a more distilled version of so many of the input mechanisms we see today all over the place. And here I imagine the buttons, levers, and wheels almost like the sides of like a fidget cube. The emphasis here was kind of on the physicality of these input mechanisms. And it was my hope that folks interacting would be genuinely interested in the way that each item behaves. Almost as if the window served as a sandbox just for the purpose of tweaking variables to see the outcome. What if all functional input was just for play? So the next 4 experiments were all created to exist as Google Chrome extensions. And I used P5 here to interact with Chrome because it's a popular browser, but also because it renders JavaScript really well. Or particularly well. Okay, cool. So my fifth is, how might cursors express mediumship? So the leap I made here was to attempt to envision the relationship with spirits that a medium might have to one that a cursor might have to dead bits of code, text, hyperlinks, etc. Using P5, I grab Chrome history data in an array, randomly grab indices, and allow them, or assign them to trail the mouse. I felt that it was important to use the classic hyperlink blue as a reference to our Web 1.0 past. As the person browsing the internet moves their mouse, new bits of data haunt their cursor. Every so often, here, I'll play this again for you guys. Oh wait, stop, just kidding. Sorry, ignore me. So as the person browsing the internet moves their mouse, new bits of data haunt their cursor. And every so often, a spirit will leave the browser and a new one will appear. But each ghost has their own unique time limit on the screen. Some may even stay on the screen for the duration of the time that you stay on the page. Even though I'm the person who coded it, I still felt that the bits of code that stared at me for like minutes on end meant something. It's like, even though that I knew that was the case, there was still like something there. And I think it's been the same for other folks who've experienced it also. Ultimately, this haunting asks that the person browsing acknowledges their history. How might this change the way we already browse the internet under surveillance? Can you guys see that when it's small? Is that cool? Okay.
You mean see it or read it?
Just see it.
See it.
Yeah. Here, you know, for this one actually, because the text is semi-important. So this is how might a click express a change in perspective. This particular prompt had me think about what it might mean for the interface that mediates our physical and digital selves, what it might mean for it to create a change in our perspective in some way. One might argue that clicks already do this. Clicks open software, they move us from hyperlink to hyperlink, they tell our computer how we'd like for it to behave. I felt here that I wanted a change in perspective less abstractly to see if I could more literally adjust the way we conventionally see the internet. The example page here is Stack Overflow. A site, for those of you who don't know, is helpful, but it's often littered with self-appointed computer experts calling out inexperienced programmers. Each click here rearranges the words on the page, and the questions may be replaced with your copyright date, or a snarky answer to the question posed might be replaced with a promoted post, etc. This prototype in some way felt particularly empowering for me, in part because I no longer felt forced to read the aggressive post, but in the moment I had the power to move it elsewhere. Okay, so how might hyperlinks express shyness? Like the bedtime ritual prompt, I was curious about the kind of care that hyperlinks might need if, on average, they took on the human trait of shyness. In this prototype, in order to click on the hyperlinks, the person browsing must approach the links with their cursor very slowly and very carefully to show that they aren't a threat, which, in this world, it's possible that hyperlinks assume that all humans are. Using the P5 DOM library, I grabbed all link data and had the font size react to the speed of the cursor. So the faster the cursor, the smaller the font size. And the only way to regain the link's trust is to wait until they grow back to normal size again. Once they return to normal size, their clickability is also restored, or the click-through ability is also restored, so then you can finally click through. The element of trust here is really what is crucial. In order to ask a hyperlink to carry you from one plane to another, in this case, you have to prove that you mean no harm. And lastly, how might touchscreens express warmth? So the text up there, it says, touch your computer, linger on the spots that feel the warmest. My final prototype assumes that the person interacting also has a touchscreen interface, which not all computers do. But every so often, one's browser pauses, the page redirects to a black screen with white text, and asks that the person browsing touch their computer and feel where it's warmest. The prototype became largely about gratitude. I find myself rarely thanking the devices that I work with on a daily basis or acknowledging the hard work they do. Through touch, my hope was to make this exercise one of intimacy and acknowledgement, while also giving my computer a second to cool down. There was something particularly beautiful about taking a rest with your computer while also feeling physically connected. So what I've discovered here is that querying interface is also largely about querying the relationship between humans and machines. While we like to think of as a neat boundary, our machines become more powerful and technologies like voice activation are on the rise. It sort of creates the illusion that machines are more human-like, yet we still treat them as tools. And I've wondered all along whether that kind of relationship translates to our relationships with other humans too. Through this series, I hope that instilling some element of humanness in our technology might help us reclaim some of the humanity we may have lost. My intention for this project is to push for a shift in digital space that is simultaneously intimate and jarring. An experience that I think applies to at least others who might have also a queer experience. There's intimacy in understanding yourself, knowing your community, allowing yourself to exist outside of traditional norms, but that also is at war with the oppressive nature of coming face to face with these very norms. These tools, to those that don't experience this kind of oppression, may feel like they're being plunged into the dark for the first time. For me, and for people that might have similar experiences, our online spaces may have always been dark. And my hope is that these tools unlock the stilted, rote nature of our interface and provide an element of agency to those that feel they need it. I also would like to imagine that my project is part of a world where we can modify our personal technology to begin to collectively imagine what an alternative future might look like. Ultimately, I would love to see this project expand into a repository of sorts where people of all kinds can add their own queer interfaces. So please reach out to me if you'd like to make this kind of work, or if you want to make this kind of work, or rather, if you have this kind of work, or you want to make this kind of work, or if you just want to talk, because I'd love to hear from you. So lastly, I'd like to end on this quote that I think is especially relevant by James Bridle from his book, New Dark Age. We have been conditioned to think of the darkness as a place of danger, even of death. But the darkness can also be a place of freedom and possibility, a place of equality. For many, what is discussed here will be obvious because they have always lived in this darkness that seems so threatening to the privileged. We have much to learn about unknowing. Uncertainty can be productive, even sublime. Thanks. Cool. So, if you folks will indulge me a little bit, I wanted to do something a little different instead of like a Q&A. I wanted to do sort of an A and Q, where this is clearly in progress, and I have a lot of questions about sort of my own work, and I wanted to kind of get answers from you folks. Obviously, you're welcome to ask questions too, but if anybody had any feedback or wanted to sort of answer these questions that I've been thinking about in your own experiences, that would be awesome. Yeah?
I've been thinking a lot about like the way that our data is now backed up and stored in multiple places, so that like I take a picture on my iPhone and it gets stored in iCloud, and then there's a virtual copy on my computer, and all of it is of a picture of like my shoe that I never meant to take, or like a screenshot of something that like I found vaguely interesting, and now in very real ways it's taking up concrete computing space and storage space all around the world.
Yeah.
But that's led to, like, for me, like a ritual of, even though I technically have limitless possible space, like going through and pruning and maintaining like kind of like this archive of memory.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you for sharing that. And is that sort of like a pruning almost to like make space for other people, or?
Well, I think it's that I think there's a power in forgetting things. Like there's things that don't need to be remembered.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you for this talk. It's really great. I just want to say that this is a really helpful framework for me to think about working on P5. Like at the contributors conference, one thing that came up was like for the 1.0 release that there would be no new features. The only new features that would be added would be those that like increase the access of P5.
Yeah.
And yeah, for me, just like in working on P5, I like really try to point myself towards not like what will make people more productive, but like what will include more people and make people enjoy like using software. So it's nice to just like have some more like concrete things to think about. So
That's awesome. I'm just really happy that I could do that for you. Cool. Yeah, send me any work that you make along those lines. Yeah.
I think that like something that I really appreciated about it was the awareness of like how we relate to perception of like our world and society through technology, and like how the like habits that we have with technology kind of like filter through all of our like being and like how we relate to each other. And I think it's like a very positive thing to do to like reorganize like the way like we interact with our computer, to like rethink about our like daily actions like relating to others. And I think that like that's like something that's like promising about this work to me. Is like helping people to understand like how all these like little actions that we do throughout the day that are like if we're on our computers a lot throughout the day are like informing our perception of like each other. And I think that like, yeah, like.
Cool, thank you. Yeah. Do you, I mean, not to put you on the spot, you can say I don't want to answer this, but are there any like sort of rituals that you have, or like anything that you notice that you do that might sort of have a butterfly effect in that way?
Yeah, I was like thinking about that. I was like thinking through questions, and I haven't like done anything like consciously in like this in like the exact same vein as this, but like something I do internally every day is I like try to like pray and say thanks like for like what I have, and like I incorporate like technology and stuff like with that. So I think like what like something that I do try to actively do is like not to like take it for granted. And I think that's like part of what you're doing as well. Is not like taking things for granted, like expanding upon them.
Yeah. Cool, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess just sort of as a comment, I grew up in the internet of like the early 2000s with like MySpace and
Totally.
forums and things like that, where you loaded a certain number of like posts per page, click a button, and then go to the next page, which is kind of what you're commenting against. The point I want to make is mostly that things just like haven't always been that way. And if people feel strongly about this, I would highly encourage you to start designing systems that even just go back like 15 years in interface design and bring a little bit more power to users. Like, you can do that. If you don't like what the big companies are doing, make something better, please. I think we would all appreciate that.
No, it's a great comment. Yeah, and I think a lot of this is also inspired from like those like LiveJournal days too, of just being like, I feel small on the internet again, and I miss that. Yeah, thank you for that.
What of us do.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I think we're wrapping it up now. Unless anybody else, anything pressing? Yeah. Yes.
It's not pressing, but about technology feeling oppressive, I think that, well, I know what I do. Once I feel that it's grabbing more attention than what I think it deserves, I just like shut it down. Just
Yeah. That's.
put the phone down and close the laptop.
I think that's the attitude. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that too. Yeah, I think it's, a lot of the interface design sort of makes it difficult to like even overpower the like compulsion, you know, but if that weren't the case,
We're bigger than that.
yeah,
That.
right, we should be, you know. But yeah, thank you. I think I need to wrap up now. So, but please talk to me after because I'll be around. Thanks all.
Up next in this room is P5 updates. The next, starting in about 5 minutes.